Hi, buddy. Captain Al speaking with your training tips designed to help make you a better, more knowledgeable flight simmer, pilot, or aviation enthusiast. Let's strap in and lower the HUD and see what is on the horizon for today. Our briefing today will cover missed approach procedures in the Boeing 747-400 and the Boeing 747-8. Missed approaches or go-arounds or rejected landings are accomplished anytime a landing cannot be made safely. The only difference is the point at which you're initiating the change from a landing attitude to a climb attitude. On a missed approach, it's done when you're doing an ILS approach or a non-precision approach, and you reach the minimums, whether it be decision altitude or the minimum descent altitude, MDA, and the visual conditions are such that you can't continue the approach, in which case you're going to be making a missed approach, which would take you from that approach phase, going to a missed approach altitude, and then reassessing the situation and going to an alternate or trying for another approach. In the case of go-arounds, that would be anytime you abort the landing to go around at an altitude above 50 feet. So if you're at 800 feet and ATC says spacing doesn't look good, there's an aircraft on short final, go around, fly runway heading, maintain 5,000, that would be the case of a go-around. A rejected landing would be anything from 50 feet and below where you have to reject the landing because of a problem on the runway. Could be a vehicle is crossing the runway and it interrupted your landing profile and you have to make a rejected landing at a low altitude. In any case, a missed approach or a go-around or a rejected landing, the procedure is the same. Procedurally, we do the same thing. There are 4 parts to a missed approach procedure, and it's best to break it into 4 parts to understand what you're doing at each phase. The missed approach steps would be listed here. The first step would be selecting go-around thrust and making a pitch change. You have to change the aircraft from a landing pitch attitude to now going to a climb pitch attitude to climb away from the runway. The second step would be to change your configuration because we have to change from a landing configuration to more of a climb configuration. And then as you reach 400 feet, we're going to select a roll mode. And at 1,000 feet or higher due to terrain, we're going to select a pitch mode. And then as we accelerate, we're going to retract the flaps on schedule. So step 1 would be if you're physically in the airplane and you're the captain, you're going to be sitting in the left seat. Your right index finger is going to push the left toga switch to activate the go-around mode. If you happen to be the first officer, you'd be sitting in the right seat, and your left index finger would push the right toga switch to activate the go-around thrust mode. Either toga switch will activate the go-around mode. Of course, if we're doing flight simulation on the computer, then you're going to have a button assigned either on your joystick, on your control column, or on your thrust quadrant. I have it on my thrust quadrant in order to get you into the go-around mode. We're also going to ensure that the go-around thrust is set. Pushing a toga switch once will initiate the go-around mode. It's going to add thrust toward the go-around thrust setting, but once the climb rate reaches 2,000 feet per minute, the thrust is actually going to stop increasing, maybe even decrease, to hold that 2,000 foot per minute climb rate. It's considered a derated go-around climb rate. Now, if you don't like that climb rate, you can always push the toga switch again, and then that will remove the 2,000 foot per minute derate and give you full go-around thrust. So one push would initiate the go-around. It's going to give you 2,000 feet a minute. You don't like it, you need more, you can always push the toga switch a second time, and that will remove the 2,000 foot per minute derate. We're also going to increase our pitch from a landing attitude, which we know is somewhere around 2.5 degrees, 2 to 2.5 degrees. And we're going to initiate it toward 15 degrees initially. Then we'll transition to flight director guidance. Now the thrust is actually going to help us with the pitch, because once you add thrust on all 4 engines, there is a pitch up tendency. With the wing-mounted engines, when you add power, the nose will want to pitch up, and that's actually what you want to do. You want the nose to come up. If you're on the autopilot, it's going to do it automatically. If you're manually flying the airplane, you have to physically pull back in order to get to 15 degrees and then transition to flight director guidance. But the power is going to help you, because it's going to tend to raise the nose in addition to the pressure that you're applying. Step 2 would be the actual configuration now, to get from a landing configuration to a climb configuration. So one of the things we're going to do is, as we're pushing toga and advancing the thrust levers, we're going to select flaps 20, and that's going to reduce the landing drag from 25 or 30, usually 30, to 20. And flaps 20 is a takeoff setting, and that gives us adequate margin for the climb and reduces the drag from landing configuration. Also, raising the gear will reduce the drag for the climb, just as we do on takeoff. Raising the gear will help the airplane climb more efficiently. So once we go flaps 20 with a positive rate shown on the altitude display on your PFD, we would raise the gear to the up position. So in addition to push and go around thrust, flaps 20, positive rate, gear up. And those are the first 2 steps. Step 3 now would be to configure to a roll mode. Depending what airplane you're in will vary a little bit in how you do this. If you're in the 747-400 at 400 feet RA, we would select a roll mode if ATC has assigned a heading. So if it were an inadvertent go around, for example, and ATC says fly runway heading, maintain 5,000, then we would go ahead and push toga, flaps 20, positive rate, gear up, and then at 400 feet we would go to heading select, because we've been given a heading by ATC. Of course, we would make sure the heading is set and then go to heading select to make sure the airplane doesn't turn one direction or another. If we need to carry out the published missed approach procedure because ATC hasn't given us a heading, if they haven't said anything, they expect us to carry out the published missed approach procedure for that approach. So if that's the case, then at 400 feet in the 747-400, we would select LNAV instead of heading select. LNAV will engage above 400 feet, won't engage below it, and LNAV will follow what is programmed on the legs page. So you have to wait till 400 feet to select a roll mode, because heading select or LNAV will not engage below 400 feet. So we wait till we see 400 on the radio altitude, and then above that we can go ahead and select a roll mode of heading select or LNAV, depending on what ATC wants you to do. Step 3 in the 747-8, a little bit different because you have an automatic feature that you don't have on the 747-400. At 400 feet, if we're going to fly runway heading, then at 400 feet we still want to go to heading select. And that's if we were given a heading to fly by ATC. So that's no different than the 400. We have to select a roll mode, meaning heading select, at 400 feet, and then fly the assigned heading by ATC. No difference there. But what is different is that you do get what's called an auto LNAV feature, or auto LNAV feature on the 747-8. So if the autopilot's engaged and you're passing 200 feet RA and the autopilot is engaged, you will get auto LNAV automatically. It'll show up on your FMA. It'll say LNAV. There'll be a green attention box around there for 10 seconds. And then, of course, if we needed heading select, we'd wait till 400 feet. Then at 400 feet, we could go to heading select to fly the assigned altitude by ATC. If we want to continue to the missed approach procedure, then we don't have to do anything because LNAV engaged for us automatically at that 200-foot point with the autopilot engaged on the Dash 8. Now, if you happen to be not flying by use of the autopilot and you're in the flight director mode, so maybe you took over, maybe you're on a non-precision approach and you took over manually and you're flying the airplane and you get to 100 feet and something doesn't look right on the runway and you decide to go around in the Dash 8. Anytime you push TOGA, auto LNAV will automatically engage above 50 feet RA in the Dash 8. So again, if you needed heading select, you'd wait till 400 feet. 400 feet, we go to heading select and fly the assigned ATC heading. If you don't require heading select and you're going to fly the published missed approach procedure, then it's already in LNAV. You don't have to do a thing at 400 feet. Just check that you're still in LNAV and that you're flying the published missed approach. So the difference is if you're hand flying at 50 feet or above, LNAV will engage automatically. If the autopilot's engaged when you're above 200 feet, the auto LNAV feature will engage automatically. And if we want LNAV, we do nothing. If we don't want LNAV, we wait till 400 feet, and then at 400 feet, we'd select heading select and then fly the assigned heading by ATC. Step 4 would be then at 1,000 feet or higher if required due to terrain. And depending on airline SOP, some airlines like you to climb to the minimum sector altitude before you start cleaning up. Some airlines will go to the missed approach altitude before you start cleaning up. Most airlines, if it's safe to do so at 1,000 feet, you could start to initiate the pitch mode in order to get acceleration to retract the flaps. So in training, we typically use 1,000 feet in order to select a pitch mode. And that pitch mode, you have a choice here, would be VNAV or flight level change. If you're selecting VNAV at 1,000 feet, then the indicated airspeed Mach window will blank. The FMC, the computer, will control the speed automatically. The bug will automatically advance to the next max flap extend limit speed minus 5 knots. And then as you retract the flaps, the speed will go up to the next flap extend limit speed minus 5 knots until the flaps are retracted, and then the speed will go to your up bug plus 20 knots. So if you do nothing to intervene, then the speed is going to continue to go up as you retract flaps until your flaps are up, and then we'll go to a clean configuration. Now, if you're using VNAV, you can open the window. You can reach up and push the indicated airspeed Mach selector. You can open the window, and then you're telling the computer that you want to control the speed manually. And then, of course, you can control the speed to whatever you want to. You can stop configuring the flaps to the desired flap setting. You don't have to go flaps up. You maybe are going to stop at flaps 5 because you're going to a holding pattern and you want to maintain speed 200 knots. If you do leave it blank, it will go up to the VREF 30 plus 100, which is the up bug plus 20 automatically. Your other choice is you can use flight level change. With flight level change, you would push flight level change, and then the bug is going to be at your target speed, and then you have to bug up the speed manually because it's not going to go up automatically like it did in VNAV. So again, we would bug up to our desired flap speed. We would retract the flaps to that desired flap setting, whether it be 5 or 1 or up. And then after the flaps are at the desired flap setting, we go ahead and check climb thrust is active, after the flaps are retracted. And then from there we can continue climbing to our missed approach altitude or to our ATC assigned altitude. And once the flaps are where they need to be or where we want them to be, then we would accomplish the after takeoff checklist. At that point we would capture the altitude, we'd level off, we'd assess the situation, and we determine what our next course of action is. Is it to divert to another airport? Is it to go back and attempt another landing? Then we go ahead and assess. So let's go to the virtual simulator and see some of the missed approach and the go around and the rejected landing in action. Okay, we're in the virtual simulator now, and we're on the ILS approach runway 7 right at Anchorage. We're at just descending to 1,600 feet. We're at flaps 10. We're about to intercept, or actually we have intercepted the localizer. We're going to be doing an ILS to 7 right to a minimums of 332 feet. That's a 200-foot height above touchdown. Visibility required for the approach is 1,800 RVR. We're going to have less than that. The visibility is going to be 1/4 mile, or about 1,200 RVR. And so we'll have the required minimums to start the approach, but then the visibility will decrease, and at minimums nothing will be in sight, and we'll make a missed approach. We're going to be doing 4 scenarios. 2 of them will be missed approaches from ILSs. 1 will be a go-around from a non-precision approach due to ATC disrupting our approach and giving us a clearance because of spacing with another aircraft to go around. Before our minimums, that would be a go-around. And then on the 4th approach, we'll do a rejected landing from 50 feet. The first 2 approaches will be done in the 747-400. The last 2 approaches will be done in the Dash 8, so we can see the auto LNAV feature. In the case of the autopilot flown approaches in the 747-400, we're going to be selecting on the first one LNAV at 400 feet as a roll mode, and then VNAV at 1,000 feet as a pitch mode to accelerate for flap retraction. On the second approach, we're going to use heading select as a roll mode instead of LNAV at 400 feet, simulating that ATC gave us a heading instead of flying the published missed approach. And then instead of using VNAV, we're going to use flight level change. Remember that you can use either flight level change or VNAV as part of your missed approach procedure. On the go-around with the Dash 8, we'll use auto LNAV, and we'll use VNAV on the first one. And on the second one, which will be a rejected landing, we'll use auto LNAV, but then we'll go to heading select at 400 feet to fly an ATC assigned heading. And then for the pitch mode, we'll use flight level change. So with that, we're going to go ahead and release the simulator. On the first approach here, I am going to go to LNAV at 400 feet. You may see if LNAV for some reason doesn't engage. It should engage because you're within 2.5 miles. But I noticed when I did this the first time it did not engage, and I had to use heading select to actually bring it over. And then LNAV did engage, and that's, again, these are some of the things you run into with a desktop model like this. It doesn't always react like the simulator or the airplane would. So if that's the case, you will see me go to heading select and turn the airplane, and then once it gets a little closer, it will capture LNAV. Should do it no problem in the airplane because you're within 2.5 miles of the active route. So with that, I'll go ahead and release the simulator, and we'll start to fly. So we do have localizer capture. We're at flaps 10. We're waiting for the glide slope to move. When it does, we'll go gear down flaps 20. I'll bring the range down just a tad here. And I also may go around just slightly early because sometimes on these desktop models the thrust comes up actually a little bit slower than it does on the airplane or the simulator, and you'll end up descending below minimums without the power coming up. So I may do it a little bit early just to demonstrate and not to go too far below minimums. The glide slope's alive now. We'll go gear down flaps 20. We'll set our speed to flap 20 speed, and we'll arm the speed brakes. Again, on an ILS approach, at the decision altitude, when you decide to go around, you will descend slightly below the glide slope, or below the DA. That is normal, but you want that loss to be minimal. There's glide slope capture. We'll go flaps 30. We'll set our speed, rough +5. And we're going to set the missed approach altitude to 3,000, which is out to Jukri, or Juke up to hold. We'll do the landing checklist. The speed brakes are armed, landing gears down, flaps are 30. Landing checklist complete, missed approach altitude is set. We have to be stabilized in IMC conditions at 1,000 feet. And you can see we are in IMC conditions. So at 1,000 feet, which is coming up, we should be on speed, on profile. Fully configured. Descent rate is good. So everything's stable at 1,000, so we can continue the approach. Visibility prior to the final approach fix would have to be above 1,800 to continue. Below it can vary, it can change. And in this case it has. So at minimums we're not going to see anything. So we're going to go around. I have my right hand on the joystick, I have my left hand on the control, on the thrust quadrant. And I'm ready to push the go around switch and ready to follow through on the flight controls even though the auto flight system is engaged. So we're approaching minimums at this time. Here comes minimums, nothing's in sight. I'm going to push toga, there's go around thrust. Flaps to 20. With a positive rate, we're going to get the gear up. There's a positive rate, we'll get the gear up. We're going to go inside quickly if we can. We're going to go to LNAV. And LNAV, you can see LNAV did not capture, so we're going to go to heading select. And we're going to make the airplane turn. Again, you'd have no problem in the airplane or simulator with it capturing, but in this case it didn't. So I'm making the airplane manually turn. We're at 1,000 feet, so we're going to go to VNAV. And that'll start us accelerating for flap retraction. And we're at a speed now, we go to flap 10. There, LNAV just captured. Here comes flaps 5. We'll go all the way to flaps up. We don't anticipate holding, so we're just going to go with the flaps retracted all the way. We'll go flaps 1. And we'll go flaps up. You'll notice LNAV did capture, but I had to make the airplane turn and heading select to do it. That's not normal. I'll go ahead and bring my heading bug to course. Normally the speed would go right up to 250. It's coming back to the flap up bug, which is okay. I could open the window and I could increase the speed if I didn't like that, if I wanted to hold plus 20 knots, and that's what I'm doing now, opening the window, increasing the speed. And then I'm going to be vectored back for the ILS approach. So instead of entering the hold, we'll go to heading select and we'll fly the heading of 250 and we'll maintain 3,000. We'll go ahead and bring our range up. And we'll go ahead and do the after takeoff checklist, which the flaps are up. And the gear handle is up and off, and the after takeoff checklist is complete. And we'll go ahead and reprogram in the ILS. We'll come around for the same approach this time. ILS 7 right, we'll extend a line into WEWO. We'll execute that. We're going to turn outside of Thule again, so we'll bring Thule down the scratch pad, Thule on top. We'll select the 069 intercept course, which is the inbound approach course. We'll execute that. We'll go ahead and check the legs page, the NAV-RAD page. Got the ILS in there. We'll recheck our BRF speed for flap 30. Our minimums are still set. We'll go to flaps 1. We'll start slowing down. And we'll slow down our flap 1 speed. We will stow the speed brake since we did a go around. I'm gonna, there it goes. Just stow the speed brake. Just as technique, it's good to do that. We'll start our turn of base leg for the ILS approach. And we'll go to flaps 5. We'll set our speed for flaps 5. We would have completed the descent and approach checklist. We won't do that now. The auto brakes are still 2. And the landing data is set at VREF 3148. Approach numbers checked and set. And the altimeters are still 2992, so that's all good. And we'll take our final turn. And we'll arm the approach. We're going to intercept from 3,000 this time instead of going down to 1,600, so glide slope's alive. I'll hold off on the gear in flaps 20 until we get a little bit closer. We'll go to flaps 10, however. Set flaps 10 speed. And this is another option, since we're 5 miles from Thule and that's the final approach fix. We could hold off on the gear in flaps 20 until we get a little closer. And we want to be intercepted on the localizer before we do that anyway. There's glide slope capture. And we know that's not a false glide slope capture, so we're good. Here comes the localizer. And we'll get localizer capture as well. There's localizer capture, and we're 3 miles from Thule. It's a good point to go gear down flaps 20, so we'll go gear down flaps 20. We'll set our speed. We'll arm the speed brake. And our missed approach altitude is already set at 3,000. So we know we don't have to set that. But we would set it to glide slope capture, but it's already set because we didn't deviate from it. Approaching Thule, about a mile here, we'll go to our final flap. Here comes flaps 30. And we'll set ref plus 5. And again, we'll make sure our missed approach altitude is set. So in this approach, instead of using LNAV VNAV, we're going to use heading select and flight level change. Again, there'll be nothing in sight at minimums because of the weather. We'll go around, but we'll simulate that ATC gives us a heading of let's say a right turn to 150 to fly. And so at 400 feet, we'll go ahead and select 150. The heading bug's out in front of us, so that's a good thing. And then at 400 feet, we'll go to flight level change. I'm sorry, at 1,000 feet, we'll go to flight level change. And then bug up, accelerate, and retract the flaps. Landing checklist, the speed brakes are armed, landing gears down, flaps are 30, landing checklist complete, missed approach altitude set. We've called the tower, we're cleared to land. At 1,000 feet, we need to be stable again because we're in IMC. Let's go outside and see what it looks like. And it looks like pea soup. We're stable, so we continue. Again, I'm following through on the flight controls. Right hand's on the joystick. The left hand's on the thrust lever or quadrant. And I'm ready to go around or land. This is really slow and accelerating up to doing the climb, a lot slower than the airplane. So here we go, approaching minimums. Minimums, nothing's in sight. I'm going to push toga, go around thrust. Flaps 20. And with a positive rate, that's just barely it right there. We'll go gear up. Now I'm going to go back inside. At 400 feet, I'm going to go roll mode. So here comes 400, so I'll go to heading select. And then I'm going to turn to my selected heading that ATC gave me, which we're going to say is 140, I think we said. 1,000 feet coming up. You can see right there on the radar. That's a good place to look. 1,000 feet. Flight level change. And we're going to bug up to... we're not going to go up all the way this time. We're going to go up to about 200 knots. We're going to stop at flaps 5. Now, we'd normally get the 10 bug, that's not showing up, but we can go flaps 10 now. And then we'll go flaps 5. And we'll stay at flap 5 speed. Okay, now we're in the dash 8. We're at flaps 10 on an intercept to the final approach course. This time we're doing a non-precision approach. We're going to be doing the LNAV Zulu, runway 28 right at San Francisco. The minimums are 642 feet. That's a, let's see, that's a 629 foot height above touchdown. We need 1 3/8 miles for the approach. We have 3 miles currently. And on the missed approach this time, which is going to be a go-around, and we're going to do that at around 500 feet. We're going to assume ATC tells us to spacing's not good, to go ahead and fly the published missed approach, and we'll do an autopilot missed approach. Things to notice are that when I push the go-around switch, flaps 20, positive rate gear up, and if the autopilot's engaged and you're above 200 feet, auto LNAV will automatically engage, and that's what we want. So we're not going to go into heading select at all, and then at 1,000 feet, all we have to do is get into a pitch mode, and the pitch mode we're going to use on the first one is VNAV. We'll come around, second approach will be, instead of coming out of CPEN, we'll come in at AXMIL. Same approach. This time we'll hand fly it, and we'll hand fly it down to a low altitude, and then when we're about 50 feet, we'll go around. We'll do a rejected landing. Again, that's procedurally the same as a go around or a missed approach. And again, we'll let auto LNAV engage. Since we're hand flying the airplane, the auto LNAV will engage at 50 feet. Since We're in the flight director mode. And then at 400 feet, we'll go ahead heading select because we'll assume ATC gave us a heading. And then pitch mode, we'll use flight level change instead of VNAV on the second one for the rejected landing. So with that, let's unfreeze the simulator, and let's see, the approach mode is armed. That'll arm the FAC and the glide path. FAC is final approach course and GP is glide path. They are FMC generated data. This is not an ILS approach, it's a non-precision approach. It's not to an auto land, it is to a manual land. And we'll probably do a segment on IANs in the future. Simulator's unfrozen. This is very similar to an ILS. In the 400 we use LNAV, VNAV for non-precision approaches. In the Dash 8 you can use VNAV or you could use IAN. IAN is a step above VNAV, so normally we'd use IAN. And the FAC just captured the final approach course. And now, like an ILS, we're waiting for the glide path to be active. Normally about 2 miles, there's 2 miles from CFIN. We'll go gear down flaps 20. We do this a little bit early on a IAN because the glide path will tend to move quicker. Because it's not a glide slope, it's a glide path. A glide slope is more of a fan, and a glide path is more like a tube. And so it'll tend to move quicker, so we normally configure sooner. You'll see how it moves down. It does move faster than a glide slope would do. And we'll arm the speed brake. The missed approach altitude here is going to be 3,200 at VICU. So once the glide path is captured, which it is, we'll set the missed approach altitude of 3,200. And we'll go to flaps, let's see, Axmill, we're about 3.5 miles. We could wait a little bit on this, going flaps 30. Okay, we're about 2 miles from Axmill. We'll go to flight 30 at this time. We'll set our speed. And we'll do our landing checklist. Of course, in the Dash 8 you have the electronic checklist. And landing checklist is complete. Checklist complete. And we can stow it. We're going to do a segment 2 on the electronic checklist. I haven't done one of those yet, but there's a lot to this checklist, so there'll be another tutorial coming out on the checklist at some point. Stow that. And we check our altitude crossing at Axmill. We call the tower, we get clearance to land. And again, we check to make sure our missed approach altitude is set at 3,200. And that we're stabilized by 1,000. Now we're going to simulate it that at about 500 to 600 feet ATC is going to tell us to go around, so at that time we'll make the go around. Again, a go around could be from any type of approach, a visual approach or an approach where you don't get to minimums. When you get to minimums, it's more of a missed approach. Anytime else it's considered a go-around. We could be not even flying an approach, completely visual, and that would be a go-around. Below 50 feet it's called a rejected landing, but again, we do the same thing, same actions in all cases. Comes 1,000 feet. In instrument conditions we should be stable. And we see we might have a little ground contact coming there. And we're going to assume now that ATC tells us to go around. Actually, we won't get to 500 feet. So we'll go around at this time. Let's go around thrust. Notice the auto LNAV already. Flaps 20. It's because you're above 200 feet. With a positive rate, we'll get the gear up. We're waiting for the altitude to start showing an increase. There it is, positive rate gear up. It's a little bit slow in the sim, like I said, compared to the airplane. It's a lot quicker than that. We'll go back inside, and at 1,000 feet, we're going to go to VNAV. We're at 1,000 feet now. VNAV, and we'll retract flaps on schedule. We're going to 3,200 feet. We're within 20 knots of flaps 5, so we'll go flap 10. And then we'll go to flaps 5. And we'll say that ATC now, they're going to pull us off the approach. So we'll make a right turn to a heading of about 090. We'll go flaps 1. And we'll go heading select. And we'll get vectors back for the approach. We'll see if VNAV can hold 3,200 feet or whether it overshoots. Simulators tended to overshoot here, which it should not. Sometimes it doesn't, most of the time it does. And it might not this time. And I'll go ahead and open the window. Looks like it's going to hold 3,200, that's good. And we'll be on vectors for the approach. On flaps 5 actually we'll go to. And we'll keep the speed up a little bit. And we'll continue to our downwind leg. And we'll put back in the LNAV Zulu. Before we do that, let's do our after takeoff checklist. Notice we didn't get the flaps fully up. We stayed at 1. So as a result of that, this could not be completed. And what we'll do there is an item override. And that'll override this item, turn cyan, completes the checklist. After takeoff checklist complete, stow the checklist. And then we'll put back in the LNAV Zulu 28 right, which is right here. We'll select the CFIN intersection, but we're not going to go out to CFIN, so we're going to go to Aximal instead. So we'll bring Aximal down, Aximal to the top, 284 is the inbound course. Execute that. And we'll go ahead and check the NavRad page. The frequency is not tuned. Oh, it's on an ILS approach, never mind. And we'll go for flap 30 here. And our minimums are still going to be 642 on the LNAV Zulu 28 right, non-ILS approach. Okay, we're back on vectors for the LNAV Zulu 28 right approach. We got the approach armed. Got FAC and glide path armed in white. We're on a heading to intercept the final approach course. And we're at flaps 5. We'll go to flaps 10 at this time. We'll set the speed and we'll do the descent and approach checklist. We haven't done that yet. So we'll go ahead and bring the checklist up. And we check recall. Nothing here. There's no notes. Notes would be right here if there were any. We had no non-normal, so there's no notes. Auto brakes are still 2. Landing data VREF 30 is 155. And minimums are 642, that hasn't changed. Approach briefing, we've already done that, that's complete. And descent checklist complete. Approach checklist altimeters. Altimeters are 9er2. And that completes the approach checklist. We'll stow it. And when we get 2 miles outside of Axmill, we'll go ahead and start to configure. I want to be fully configured by Axmill. Again, the glide path will move faster than the glide slope, so we configure a little bit sooner than we would on an ILS. Comes 2 miles, so we'll go gear down flaps 20, arm the speed brake, set the speed. And coming up on a mile from Axmill, when the gear's down, we'll go flaps 30, gears down, flaps 30. We'll set our speed, rough +5. And at glide path capture, we'll set our missed approach altitude of 3,200. Here's the glide path, so we'll set in 3,200 for the missed approach altitude. And we check our altitude crossing at Axmill. We'd call the tower, we'd get our clearance to land. And we do the landing checklist. So we'll come up here, go like that. Landing checklist complete, checklist complete. Stow the checklist, and we'll go outside. And we're going to go ahead and disconnect the auto throttle if we can find it here. Auto throttle's off. And we're going to go ahead and disconnect the autopilot. Autopilot's off, so we're manual flight now. IMC, we want to be stabilized by 1,000 feet. And again, we're going to do a rejected landing out of this.
1,000.
Again, notice how auto LNAV will come on at above 50 feet when you're in FD mode, which we are now. There's our runway, you can see it out there, approaching minimums. Minimums will continue, landing. About 300 feet here. 200 to touchdown.
200.
Okay, we're going to decide to go around right in here.
100.
He says go around now, so we'll go around thrust.
40, 30, 20, 10.
Power comes up really slow on this. We did touch on the wheels there because the power didn't come up that fast. So you notice we'll go flaps 20. And then we'll go gear up with a positive rate. There's a positive rate, we'll gear up. Auto LNAV already engaged. You saw it engage very early there because we were about 50 feet. And we'll go back inside here and we'll get on the autopilot, which I have to take my hand off the stick to do that, so it might wobble around a little bit. And we'll go to heading select. We'll assume ATC now wants us to fly a heading, so we'll go heading select and we'll go to whatever heading he wants us to go to. Let's say he says turn left to 240. Above 1,000 feet, we're going to go flight level change this time. And we're going to increase the speed to, let's just go to 200 knots. And we'll go to flap 10 now. We're within 20 knots of flaps 5 speed, or so we'll go flap 10. And then when we get to 5, we'll go to 5. Continue on to 3,200, which is the missed approach altitude. There's flaps 5. We're flying the heading assigned by ATC. We're out of LNAV. We've captured 3200. We're going to stay at flap 5 speed just for vectors, or if we were going to go hold. Maybe we'll bring the speed up to 200 knots. And then maybe ATC says turn left to a heading of 180, let's say. We'll go ahead and turn to 180. And we'll stay with the configuration we have. Again, I could technique, but I could stow the speed brake. And then I could do my after takeoff checklist. And again, the flaps are going to stay at 5. We never got them up, so we're going to do an item override on that. And that'll complete the after takeoff checklist, and then we go ahead and stow that. Oops, we'll go ahead and stow that. And then we continue on with whatever our course of action is going to be. So that completes the discussion on missed approaches, and on go-arounds, and on rejected landings. It all worked pretty good in the PMDG model, except there's two things I noticed. One is that sometimes LNAV will not engage like it did on that one approach. It was within 2.5 miles, but it still didn't capture it, and I had to make it manually go to heading select and make it manually capture the LNAV profile. The other one is that when you do push toga, the power is really pretty slow in coming up, and it takes a long time to get a positive rate, and that's actually not very accurate. But still, procedurally, you can do the same things that you would do in the airplane as a flight simmer. So thanks for watching. Until our next briefing, keep the blue side up. Captain Al, out.